How do you feel when things don't go according to plan? I'd wager that when things go differently than you had expected, that there's a certain amount of tension, maybe even some fear, but also a little bit of excitement. As a dungeon master or player of the world's greatest role-playing game, we often have some idea already in our head about how a given encounter or scene is going to go. And the sad fact is that the more often that we are proven correct, the less tension, fear, and excitement that we feel, and the more we start to slide towards feeling like things are predictable, or perhaps, dare I even say it, boring. My name is Timothy, though some people do call me Tim, and I'm a professional dungeon master running over 300 games of Dungeons & Dragons every year. And today I'm going to teach you a simple way to ensure that things never get stale at your table or stay that way for long. Today we're going to talk about preparing complications. First, it's important that we understand what a complication really even is. In the context of Dungeons & Dragons, complications are things that are going to change how any given scene is going to be portrayed or end up. They typically worsen the situation, though that doesn't have to always be the case. But whatever they do, they adjust the pacing of that scene. It doesn't do any good to shift something from being slow and methodical to slow and methodical. It's important that it either reverses the pace that you're currently experiencing or enhances and deepens the pace further down the rabbit hole that you're in. It's okay, for instance, to make a fast scene faster or a slow scene slower, but not so good if everything is just going to maintain a status quo. It can be as minor as a jump scare moment that shocks people into thinking about the circumstance they're in, or as major as a full-on deadly encounter rolling its way around the corner and threatening everybody's lives. Regardless, it should always be tied to the current circumstances in your game and the setting that your players are a part of. And there are a number of different ways that complications change gameplay. First and foremost, they force players to adapt. We've all gotten into those ruts where we are moving along towards a specific goal, and we've gotten into some kind of rhythm and routine towards achieving it. But when a sudden complication jumps up and changes things for us, we have to change how we react as well, because continuing in the same path is no longer going to be viable. They also encourage creativity and improvisation for the DM, even when prepared ahead of time. Finding a way to fit it into the narrative and finding the best way to fit it in that is going to have the most impact on the story and the narrative pacing of your game is an art form that we can explore and work on for a lifetime. And they change gameplay by altering that pace and tone of the scenario that we're part of. When talking about preparing complications, I have two different lists that I use on a regular basis that will definitely elevate gameplay at your table. The first is the complication list, and the second is the complication table. A complication list is exactly what it sounds like. A list of 10 different complication options that will adjust gameplay at your table and change things up that are based upon the scenarios or the setting that you expect your players to be in. Why 10? Because it's really easy to come up with 5. That might seem a little bit silly, but if you brainstorm out the first 5 ideas that come to your mind and put them down on a list, you're going to get some pretty low-hanging fruit, and some of those ideas are going to be pretty good. But when you go from the 6th and 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th, your brain stretches a little bit further as coming up with those ideas digs a little deeper into the recesses of your mind until eventually you uncover some of the gold that's hidden down there dredging the bottom of your brain. So I think a list of 10 usually results in a better list than a list of 5. And with a little bit of practice, it won't take you terribly long to come up with these. And it's time well spent. Every game session, I prepare a new list of complications, even if there are items on my list that would have been easy enough to just copy and paste to the next section. I go ahead and throw the old list out and don't refer to it and write down a list of 10 new ideas, and if an idea happens to have been on my old list, that's totally okay. But doing it from memory and from imagination instead of doing it from copying and pasting old lists means that you are inspired again with new ideas, and you tend to be more on track for the kind of thing that is going to make your game enjoyable. As an example list, when I was running Descent into Avernus and we were wandering around Elturel in the Nine Hells, this was one list that I came up with. We had a building nearby collapse and dust and debris flying out over the road. An earthquake as the city shook and threatened people to fall down. A strike of lightning that crashed down either on the PCs or nearby from the strange electrically charged dark ball in the sky. A small shrine to a goodly deity nearby that warped to have leering gargoyles and devilish themes. Another of those earthquakes, but this one opened up a rift in the city that allowed a view of what was below. A blood-curdling scream that was abruptly cut off. The howls of a pack of mutated dogs. A sighting of the dreaded Narzagon, a creature that was well outside of the weight class of the PCs at the time. A group of spined devils flying overhead searching for something to do. Or the incessant droning sound of a distant chasme that was approaching and coming closer. While I really love and enjoy using these complication lists and have found them to be an incredibly versatile tool, the complication table goes a little bit further by taking some of the choice out of my hands and putting it on a randomized set of dice. When it comes to the complication table, I also like to use a D12 plus D8 system for determining which of my complications is going to come to pass. There are a number of different adventure modules that utilize this same system, but they don't necessarily tell you why they're using a D12 plus D8. But it's essentially because if I were to add a D10 to my original complication list, then I would have a complication table, but every item on the list would have an equal weight of appearing at any given time. Using a D12 plus a D8, you end up with a wide array of possible numbers that could pop up, but also a probability curve that tends to flow from least likely up to most likely and back down to least likely. This means that the complications you put at the middle of your table are more likely to come to pass, even if they happen so repeatedly, whereas the items at the outliers are less likely. So the more dangerous encounters or more extreme events and you place at the outer edges, and the more minor and repetitive ideas that you have, like those jump scare moments, end up in the middle. When creating the table, I typically categorize things down into 7 small sections, which you can then expand out as much as you like depending upon the number of complications that you've already prepared. Those complications then tend to look a little like this. 2 to 4 on the dice, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9 through 13, 14 to 15, 16 to 17, and 18 to 20. I then categorize those 7 sections by how much of a change they're likely to impact on my table. At the outer edges, the least likely options to show up on my dice are extreme encounters. Coming in from that are major encounters, then moderate ones, and at the most likely to show up on a D12 plus D8, we have the minor encounters. No matter how many times you roll your D12 and your D8 together, you are far more likely to repeatedly land upon minor encounters in the center, and so it's important that you consider those ones very carefully and perhaps have numerous results for that section versus the far less likely results that spread out over the others. But if you're not intending to roll on the table terribly often, or if it doesn't matter if the same result recurs repetitively, then you can get away with just a single item on each of these 7 different categories. As an example, when I was running the Wilds Beyond the Witchlight campaign, I had a table that looked just like this with 1 item or so on each of the options. At both 2 to 4 and 18 to 20, my extreme encounter was one of the thieves of the Coven stealing somebody away to the Hall of Illusions, and then a mother running around screaming frantically and lowering the mood of the carnival by 2 points. a tracking mechanism that was important at that stage. At 5 to 6 and 16 to 17, I had one of those same thieves stealing something from an unticketed teenager. I added an extra d6 to determine whether or not it was Sopig, Gleam's Shadow, or the Lordling. At 7 to 8 and 14 through 15, I had several different moderate ideas. A group of hecklers might make an appearance and start trying to bring down the mood of one of the performers. Kettle Steam might have been sighted disappearing around a tent just a little bit ahead of the party, or a Blink Dog puppy playpen might overturn and scatter the teleportive little beasts all over the place, and Mother Dog is frantically trying to chase them down and bring them back. As my minor encounter, I had a repeat option for a Put Pocket to try and use sleight of hand against one of the party members. The Put Pocket was a creature that was moving around trying to put nasty things into people's pockets as a practical joke. If the players took it well, it could increase the mood, but if they took it poorly, then it could bring things down. Hopefully this video has provided you with some inspiration and solid help for introducing more complications into your game of Dungeons & Dragons. If you're struggling to come up with ideas, then drop a comment down below and I'll respond with whatever pops into my head to try and help you out. If you're a supporter here on YouTube or over on Patreon, then you can find the Complication Table template waiting for you to fill out for your next game. Either way, thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.